Welcome to Book Reporter Talks To, where my guest today is Rose Carlyle, the debut author of The Girl in the Mirror, who's joining us today from New Zealand, where as we speak, it's now 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and for her, it's 9 a.m. tomorrow. So I really love that. I'm glad to see there's going to be a tomorrow. The Girl in the Mirror is her debut thriller, and it was an instant bestseller when it was released in August in New Zealand and Australia, and it will be a Book Reporter Bets On selection. I read it the last day of my vacation as I was floating around the pool on a blue tube, and I immediately wanted to book a trip to the Seychelles and sail. In fact, she so transported me with this book that when I looked up, there should have been a lot more water around me because I just loved being able to feel like I was out there on the water in this beautiful yacht. And I love this, I just think it was this book that really brought me to another place immediately. So welcome, Rose. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
So let's start with you telling us about The Girl in the Mirror. You tell us because it's far better than my elevator pitch, I'm sure.
Sure. So The Girl in the Mirror is a thriller that started with a question, really. And that question was, if you had the opportunity to switch your life for somebody else's, would you take it? So the book explores this question through the life of two identical twins, Summer, who seems to have the perfect life, the perfect husband. She's living on board a yacht in Thailand. And Iris, who, despite being her identical twin, has always felt inferior. She feels less beautiful on the inside, and her life has fallen apart with the breakdown of her marriage, and which resulted in the loss of her job and her home. But of course, there's a lot more to the story than that, but I don't want to give too much away.
Well, I love this line that I read that describes it. It's a thriller with identical twins, fast yachts, tropical harbors, secrets and deceit, sex, and crocodiles. So I think all those are in the book. Those are definitely all there. And not quite in that order. So, years ago, my husband and I had a catamaran. In fact, it's still somewhere in the back of the property here. And we used to go sailing, and I would be the one that was on the boat that was always in the wrong place. Like he'd say, prepare to come about, and I'd have to lay flat because I was always in the wrong place, or I would end up in the water as the boom came across, or things like that. So every book starts with the kernel of an idea. What was your idea? What got you started on this book?
I think the idea that started is actually a scene that's right in the middle of the book, and I don't want to give too much away about it, but it involved the idea of not being able to tell twins apart and some of the disturbing possibilities that could come out of that situation. And it's interesting that ended up right in the middle of the book, because it's almost as though my sister and I actually came up with the plot together, which is ironic considering it's a book about sisters. And we started with that scene, and then we sort of built what would happen before that scene, and then what would be the consequences of that scene. And it's ended up sort of a nicely right in the middle, that's where we began.
Mirror twins is something, and it's kind of interesting that you say it's in the middle of the book, because the mirror, going back and forth of what's going on. Mirror twins is something I did not know about. I did not know that was something that could happen or whatever. So tell us about the readers, because I bet they don't know about it either.
No, I had heard about it years ago and forgotten about it. So the day that my sister and I came up with the plot of The Girl in the Mirror, we were at lunch and we came up with most of the plot, and we also came up with the title, The Girl in the Mirror. So then I went home and researched identical twins and remembered that all identical twins start life as a single egg that then splits. But if it splits quite late in the process, it's as though there's already begun to be a right-hand side and a left-hand side to the developing embryo. And so one of the twins is reversed, and her heart is on the right-hand side of her body. She's often left-handed, and all of her organs are reversed right to left. So that's a real phenomenon. And because I already had the title, The Girl in the Mirror, I knew that had to be incorporated into the book, even though it made things more difficult for my main character, that in fact, she's only identical on the outside. She's very different on the inside.
And there's so many points in the book where she just can't have an exam. She can't have anybody who figures this out, because they're going to see she's the opposite of what organs really are, like where they typically are in your body. So as a result, she can't have anybody trying to figure out what's going on with her. Very, very interesting.
I also think that that maybe contributes to her sense of of being the wrong twin, you know, the one who, for whom everything, she's sort of the leftover twin, the unexpected surprise baby, because her mother didn't realize that she was having twins.
Right. And she's also the one that, well, I'm not right. The other one is right. I am the opposite. I'm not correct. And it gives her kind of an inferiority thing, like right from the beginning of what's going on with her. You know, years ago, you sailed the Indian Ocean with your family. And what prompted that trip? What made you decide to go do that with your children?
I think that we were raising our children in the city, and we wanted to give them an experience beyond city living. And that was one way that my husband at the time had grown up sailing. He was a lifelong sailor. And so we knew that it was possible, and we were really attracted to the idea of expanding our children's horizons, literally, and taking them to a lot of different countries around the world. So it's partly about the sailing, but it's also about the fact that you travel, you reach all these different destinations that it's not easy to reach by an airport. And so you really see a different side of these countries from what the usual tourist would see.
You know, I absolutely love that, because I think that so much time is spent on what kids should learn in school. And there's so much to learn on experience, like going out to do that trip, of seeing countries from a different perspective, seeing the world being so much bigger than the way they envision it, you know, every single day. And also like kind of the life lessons that happen when you're out doing something like that. How old were they when you did that trip?
So we had done smaller trips with them when they were younger. So one of the trips we had done was to circumnavigate New Zealand, which is actually quite, some people say it's more difficult than circumnavigating the world, because you have to go deep into the Southern Ocean to get around the bottom there. And we did that when they were 8, 10 and 12. And then we sailed across the Indian Ocean when they were 9, 11 and 13.
So as a result, they'd had some experience of being on the water. Were they good at working on the boat as well? Were they good at sailing? And how good a sailor are you?
Well, definitely my oldest son is better than me. He was just a born sailor, and he was better than me from the moment he took hold of the tiller on his first little sailboat when he was about 6. So some people are just born to it, I think. But they definitely got some challenges along the way, because at one stage, actually, while we were doing the voyage that's described in the book, our autopilot broke after one night at sea. And I thought that my husband and I were going to do 12 hours a day, and night for the next week, because it's a little bit like driving a car where nobody can actually step away from the wheel day and night, 24 hours a day for a week. And so I thought this was going to be quite exhausting. But my 14-year-old son, when he heard about this, volunteered to do a full shift of 4 hours during daylight and 4 hours overnight. And he did that every day for a week, which is a huge ask even for an adult. We've had adults on the boat who haven't really been able to do that because they found it too frightening or just too much responsibility. And our 12-year-old also did a daytime shift. And so we really felt like by the time we got to the Seychelles, they had just grown up so much. They had really taken on adult responsibilities. And in fact, if our autopilot hadn't broken, we wouldn't have gone to the Seychelles. And so the book would never have happened, or at least it would be different.
It'd be a different voyage. It'd be something different. You know, it was, when my son was younger, my younger son was younger, we gave him a plane ride. Like he could be on a plane for one of his birthday presents. And the pilot at one point, he was sitting up in the co-pilot seat, said, "Would you like to fly for a while?" And Corey said yes. So he was allowing him to fly, and he was keeping an eye, like he had his hands on the wheel, and so did Corey. And about a half hour later, he said, "I just want you to know that Corey has been flying solo for the last 30 minutes. And we were like, "You're kidding." And he says, "What's really odd," and it's the same thing with your children, I'm sure, is normally adults would not keep the plane straight, like you'd start pitching down or whatever. And it was something about, they just said, "I could do it." And he said, he's pulling perfectly straight. And I've never, usually adults would be, challenged to do that when I teach them. And it's interesting because I think because they don't have preconceived notions of what's going on, they just say, "Oh, I can go do that. What do you need me to do?" And it's a totally different kind of atmosphere for them.
Right. Yeah. I think we're in touch with that really deep part of their brain. And I tried to convey that in the novel, the sense that Iris has when she's at the helm of the ship, that she's in tune with the ocean, and she lets her subconscious take over and just lets instinct sail the boat, and she feels it rather than making conscious decisions, because I think that part of our brain is actually more competent sometimes.
Yeah, because it's just like, okay, this is where we should go. This is what we should be doing. I should be pulling this, as opposed to what do you think I should be doing in the next 20 minutes? Instead, let's just let it happen. And she
Yeah.
is so competent at sailing the boat. I mean, she's just amazing. Have you ever been on a yacht like let me see, it's Bathsheba. Have you been on a yacht like that?
Well, Bathsheba is based as sort of my ideal yacht. So I took a couple of yachts that we owned when I was married to my ex-husband, and took my favorite aspects of them and sort of glitz the yacht up a bit, because that's something that I really love about writing, that you can create a beautiful world, you can create a beautiful boat, and I create a beautiful home that Summer and her husband Adam live in Australia. And even when we get to the Seychelles, I didn't really have to make the Seychelles any more beautiful than they really are, but I choose the things that I remember as being the most beautiful and the most atmospheric, and that's what I like to put on the page. And contrasting that, of course, is the dark, evil, sinister side of the story.
Yeah, I'll take without the dark, evil, sinister part, but you definitely made me go in. And if there was not a pandemic that I couldn't travel someplace, I would be booking a trip. I mean, I was just so captivated with that whole part of the world. I found myself going in and Googling and looking up on maps and looking at where they had gone. And I tell you, people say, where would you like to go in the world? Would you like to go to Europe, Asia? I've always said I'd like to go to Australia, New Zealand, the Seychelles, that whole area. Like that's like, just to go in that whole body of water area, the land, that part of the world. It's the one place I'd like to go. And I don't know if I could do the 24-hour flight, but once I got there, I think I'd be endlessly happy. So I was in my tube floating around the pool, totally living the life and living the dream on the ship. Like I was on that yacht with you. I was laying up on the deck. There's no way I was steering the ship for 1 second at all. That was never happening. But I was definitely laying there and looking out on the horizon. And I really did love that there was nothing around. There was something really kind of lovely about the fact that you weren't seeing anything. You didn't have to worry about you were in a shipping lane at that moment. You were just out there sailing. And it's that connection with the water when it's like that is just incredible.
Well, a lot of people have told me, so Auckland went back into lockdown a week after publication, and so there were a lot of readers reading this book in lockdown, and they said that they have rediscovered travel through fiction this year, which is easier on the checkbook, and there's no jet lag. So in some ways it's better than the real thing. You just get the glamour without the difficulty of finding your way through a foreign country.
And packing, which is my biggest nightmare, because I always overpack. I mean, I'm the type that if I'm going to a hotel and I'm going to be there for a while, even on a business trip, I would pack my swim flippers, my kickboard, water weights, all these kinds of things. So I always made sure that I had whatever status you had to have on an airline to bring the most amount of luggage that you could bring with you. Because I would be bringing, if I was going to go in that pool for 20 minutes, I was going to be in it the exact right way. And I think that you're right, though, the getting there and the delays and everything that can happen along the way. It's like coming home from a vacation. That night before you're leaving to come home is great. And then you hit the airport and you've got to either go through customs or find your luggage or whatever. And it's over. Vacation's out. So you got to get opportunity to just get there and get home. It was just fine.
Yeah, no unpacking at the other end either.
No, that's exactly. No laundry, no anything like that. I think I also read that you crewed on some scientific expeditions to Antarctica. How did you get involved in those ventures?
Oh, New Zealand's a small country and the sailing community is small. So if you sail, you probably meet the guy who does the scientific yacht charters. So there are a number of sub-Antarctic islands below New Zealand, or a number of different groups of islands. And I think in order to stop too many scientists from going to them, they don't have landing strips on them. So the scientists have to face a 3-day voyage of continual seasickness in order to study their beloved birds and marine life. So I just got invited to go along, and it was actually my first time offshore. I had only ever sailed within sight of land. So suddenly I found myself in the middle of the Southern Ocean, where I don't think the wind ever dropped below gale force for a week.
Wow.
And at one stage got up to force 12, which is as high as the Beaufort scale goes. So it was really getting thrown in the deep end, so to speak. But the advantage of doing that was that afterwards I knew that I'd faced just about the worst that the ocean can throw at me, and that it was going to be easier from then on.
And do you get seasick, or are you fine on the water?
I had ear patches when I was in the Southern Ocean, just because I didn't want to get out there and discover too late that I was useless and no good as crew.
Mm-hmm.
But then after that, I only really need that when I'm in the Southern Ocean and it's blowing a gale. So on the tropics, I was absolutely fine. I didn't even think about seasickness. And then we hit the Mozambique Channel, and yeah.
Different.
Yeah, different, yeah.
Just a little bit. If you could sail anywhere right now, where would you want to go?
Well, I think I do dream about going back to the Seychelles, maybe because I've written about it. And I mean, I experienced that feeling of not being able to travel when I was writing, because suddenly I was divorced and I had 4 teenagers in the house, and I was back at work after being a stay-at-home mother for quite a long time. And so the only way that I could travel was through my imagination. And I think writing does the same thing as reading, that it really brings you back there, and you can smell the place, and you can taste the food, and you can hear the sounds and see the sights. And so I do have a really special place in my heart for the Seychelles, a very, very welcoming country. And there's something special too about the fact that we diverted from Madagascar because of our broken autopilot. And so we got there, and I remember saying to the children, I don't know what language they speak. I don't know what the people are going to look like when they come to the boat. It's all just, I hadn't done any research about the country that we were going to end up in.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, let's all learn together. There's kids, do you know anything? Do you remember anything from anyone? At the same time, anybody got a chart on this one? No, it's so interesting that you're saying that, because it was something that was so different, but by the same token became such the impetus of the story, of what's going on. I can tell you have a real, bond with the place. Now, your sister, I know, was very intrinsic in a lot of the idea, maturation of the book and knocking ideas around with you. Does she sail as well? Has she been to the Seychelles? Has she been on some of the same adventures?
No, my sister is an absolute landlubber, and that was actually really helpful, because she was a little bit worried about me writing about sailing. She said, sailing is so boring to her, but I thought that was actually a good litmus test, that if she read it and it kept her interest and she didn't feel confused by the sailing, because she doesn't know one end of a boat from the other, then I felt confident that readers could follow the story. Yeah, so she came round. She was convinced once she read it. She said, yeah, I can see why you've put this in, because that was, Iris is not me at all, but this is one part of Iris that really is me, that I love the water and I love sailing, and experiences like going into the water in the middle of the ocean with nothing else around you, just pure ocean, are things that I have really done.
Wow. So yes, it was very clear, but you also made me want to do it, even though I would be with the seasick patches right behind him. I probably have them all over my body, to be perfectly honest. But by the same token, you really did such a good job of you talk about the technical parts of what's going on the ship. And I kept saying to my husband, who's a sailor, he's sailed a lot. And I've said to him, I think you'd really enjoy this book, because you'd actually understand all the parts that I was going, but they were just filling in the story for me. It was fine. But at the heart of the story, there's also this big inheritance, and a father who has a number of children, and there's just one way to inherit that fortune. So let's talk about this mega guy that's really off camera most of the story, but he's definitely this huge presence.
Yeah, it was really interesting creating a character who, right from the start that he has died before the novel begins. And yet he really is such a huge presence in the novel. And we do get him in some of the flashbacks to an earlier timeline. It's interesting that a few people have commented that that the will that he leaves behind seems quite unbelievable. But I remember that I had read a long time ago about a Canadian millionaire who left the bulk of his fortune to whoever could give birth to the most children within 10 years after his death. And he left that open to members of the public. It was not just his family.
Mm.
And sparked a baby boom in Toronto that resulted in 4 women sharing the inheritance. And those women had had 9 children each in the decade after he had died. So they had worked really, really hard for their money.
Well, it's like, okay, now can you support those children? You really need that share of the money.
Yeah, they absolutely did. And the tragic thing is that there were some, of course, who missed out on that inheritance, but had given birth to a number of children in the hope of receiving it. So it was really quite unfortunate that he left his money in that way. And I mean, I think this is something I was exploring in the novel, that, an inheritance can have a terrible effect on the family whom it's meant to support and help.
Yeah, but it definitely puts them at odds with each other. They're different members of this family because he has more than one family. He had the original wife, the second wife, and the third wife, if I remember correctly. And the second and the third have the children. Because I love this. At the beginning, he just wanted to make money. And by the time he was ready to have children, that wife was too old to have children. So he found a new wife, which just says something about him right from the start. There were like a couple of lines that just like, oh, wow, I've got him figured out. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was, I was writing him from the point of view of quite an adoring daughter. So she doesn't really pass judgment on him. She's never really escaped the need to win his approval. But I think that the reader sees beyond that and very much sees that his decisions have destroyed the very thing that he cared about the most.
Mm-hmm. And he put the second, his first family and his second family at odds with each other as well, because that woman is sitting there going, she wants her child to have the baby to get all the money. And it's like the two families are fractured against each other as well. Not that they got along, swimmingly well before that, but now it's really pushed them to a new level.
Yeah, and I quite liked also the idea that although some people would go absolutely nuts to try to win this fortune, there were some who tried not to let it affect their lives and declared that they were stepping out of the race, and yet it still affected them, because I think that's one of the tragedies of human relationships, is sometimes even if you decide that you're not going to be jealous and you're not going to have rivals and you just want to be friends with everyone, you can't do that if the other people in your family or in your community don't agree with you and want to treat you as a rival. And so I really wanted to create a cast of characters who react, the whole spectrum of reactions from absolutely I'm not going to let this affect me to, well, all I want is the money, and then seeing what happened when you throw those characters together.
And they're definitely all different kinds of personalities. You picture them all at a holiday table sitting together, and you can see there would just be conflict to beat the band. I mean, everybody would just want to go home by the time the dinner was over. And there are money moments in this book that I was reading. Did you plot in advance? Because there's so many, and I'm not going to give any of them away, aha moments that end up happening. Did you actually script everything out, or did you just start writing?
So my sister and I planned out the main plot points together over a single lunchtime, and it just really poured out of us. It was amazing how quickly we came up with that. But there were some points in the middle that were a bit murky when I started writing, and some of that did seem to come out of my pen as I wrote, so to speak. So it's interesting. Sometimes you wonder where these characters came from. The little details of the characters, something that they're eating or something that they're wearing just seems to occur at the moment that you're writing it. And then you think, yeah, this is better than if I'd planned it. So you just keep writing.
It's totally working. So let me just keep heading in this direction. I didn't see this coming, but hey, this is a good day. This is a good writing day. Your sister's been so supportive. And what drew you to write about these two sisters that clearly have these sparks of jealousy between them, namely Iris is so jealous of her sister Summer. And we talked earlier about, why these things could have happened. But what spurred you to write about them as twins?
Yeah, it's Maddie and I, my sister Maddie and I would joke about the fact that we were so incredibly unqualified to write about sibling rivalry because we just didn't, I think it just didn't occur to us to feel that way about each other, maybe because we were very different. And so we sort of had our spheres in which we were trying to excel, and they didn't really cross over much. And that's also why I feel as though stories are floating around in the sky and then they just land in your lap. And even if you feel like you're not the right person to write that story, you have to do it because the story chose you. So I ended up writing a story about sibling rivalry taken to the absolute extreme, despite the fact that I don't know much about it and that I've always had a great relationship with my sister.
You know, and you talk about these twin moments, which the sisters find so hard to describe. Did you do a lot of research on like twin kind of moments where like, oh, I feel like this and she feels like that? Did you do a lot of research into what twins are like?
Yeah, I think I did. I have always been interested in twins and, you know, greater multiples. I've had a few friends who've had triplets, and it's been interesting seeing the, you know, the really different dynamic when you've actually got triplets. It in some ways makes things so much harder, especially identical triplets. And yeah, a lot of it was just my imagination, imagining what it would be like to have a twin who seems to know what you think, and it's actually quite hard to keep a secret from your twin because she knows you so well.
She knows you so well. She's like, totally got your number. When I was younger, I babysat for these twin boys, and they were, I guess, 2 or 3 years old. And we used to put them in this big playpen thing together. And it was rather large. It was like, 8 feet in diameter or whatever. And one day they looked at each other and they said, okay, Keith, okay, Kevin. And they pulled the thing up and ran in two opposite directions. I was like, you little plotters, like, how long have you come up with that as an idea? But it was just the way the two of them looked at each other with like a sort of wink in their eye and said, this is what we're going to do. And here we go. And I was like, I am never going to win with these two because they now are conspiring. They're in their own little orbit, like, around me. And you always wonder what happened, like, later on in life, because believe me, they were co-conspirators then.
Right. Yeah. Well, I believe my twin uncles had their own language, and so they were able to communicate with each other in a way that the rest of the family couldn't always understand what they were planning. So they were very, very close, and in fact called each other by the same name. So their surname is Mansfield, and they call each other Mance. And I quite like the idea of twins so my twins call each other Twinny, the idea that they called each other by the same name.
So they both do the same thing. I also love that one of the twins' phone's password was Rose, and it was Summer Rose, and there was a fun little Easter egg in there. And how much fun are moments like that when you're writing, where you're going to just drop in something and go, okay, reader, here's something fun for you?
Yeah, one of the little Easter eggs that I put in actually is that the town of Wakefield is a fictional town because when I was a teenager, my sister and I read the Sweet Valley High books about Jessica and Elizabeth Wakefield, who were beautiful identical twins. And I thought that's just a little moment for readers who remember those books to enjoy. Yeah, it was fun putting in a few little moments like that. Yeah, it's one of those.
It's like, here are my little gifts to everyone. And I love that Iris needs to fool everyone, including her toddler stepson, Tarky, who clearly seems to know something's awry. They always say, babies and children know that something's up. And he has a very funny line of parroting what he mentioned about she wants to send him to daycare. And she tries to pretend that he said another word that would be much, much happier for his father to have heard. And it's just so funny because he just sits there and they said, what do you think? And he says, daycare. So it's like, where did you go with that phrase? And it was just so much fun because it's like out of the mouths of babes. It's like Tarky is kind of like the smartest one in the room right now, everybody. As far as everybody's concerned, he's the one that's got the game figured out.
Yeah, he was another one of those characters who I really enjoyed writing because you get Iris's perspective on him, where she really underrates him and doesn't think much of him. She thinks he's got an annoying name and that basically everything about him is annoying. But he really, I loved him right from the start. I'm a mother, and I saw him as a child going through a very difficult time, and everyone's kind of ignoring him. Even his own father is not really paying attention. So I had to have him occasionally pipe up with something that showed that he knew a lot more about what was going on than everyone else realized.
Well, I'm kind of the smartest person in the room, but no one quite gets it yet. And the moment where she takes him off and she just like changes diaper and she's just sitting there like, I can't even believe that I am dealing with this. And I feel like she's just giving him a look like, can't you just figure this out yourself? Like, can't you just like get it together? Because I am not in the mood for this. And it's sort of like she gets to the point where she signed up for this different life, but she really didn't think about what the life was going to be. She thought about just one part and not all the rest of the parts that would have to happen. And that was so much fun because you did a good job of, gee, these are all the things you didn't think about. You signed up for the whole game.
Yeah, and yet it's so obvious as a reader that of course this is what she's signing up for. But I mean, you know, she is very young and she's really blinded by her her feelings towards Summer and towards Summer's husband, that she doesn't see what's absolutely plain, you know, in plain sight ahead. And so I think as the reader, it's quite fun to see her, you know, reap what she's sown.
Yeah, and I love when she goes and she meets Adam's family in the Seychelles. And I love when she said it's easier to be Summer when she was talking to people who she was just meeting for the first time, instead of those who she was supposed to know her history. So all of a sudden she's like, oh, good, I'm meeting you for the first time. Great, we can have a conversation. The others, who are you and what am I supposed to know about you? So I feel like her not knowing something gave you something to play with as well as the writer.
Yeah, that was really fun because, you know, occasionally she doesn't know whether she's met someone before or not, or she knows she's met them before, and but then she might discover that they have a really different opinion of Iris from what she thought. And of course, another thing that she suffers from is people telling her what they think of Iris because they don't know who they're talking to, and she has to swallow some pretty bitter pills at times.
Yeah. And it also touches on, we talk a lot about Iris thinking that Summer's life is perfect. And perception and reality are two different things. There comes this moment that everybody thinks, oh, so-and-so's life is perfect. And I think that these days of social media has really augmented that as well. Everything is perfect. You show the great dinner. You don't show the one you burned. You don't show the time you were late coming home. You just show the family all wind up. You don't look at when everybody's hair is not combed, as everything's perfect. And I think that what you're talking about there too is Iris is seeing what she thinks is all perfect with Summer, but she doesn't really know if it is. And now she's inside that marriage. Now she's inside that world and seeing a different thing. What were your thoughts about that? Was there a little commentary on that as well?
Yeah, I did actually, during the editing process, I put in a specific comment about social media because Iris, despite being quite obsessed with Summer, chooses to actually go and live in a different city when she finishes high school. And so for the past few years, she really has been seeing social media Summer rather than the real Summer and, you know, face to face. So although she felt that that was maybe a good decision to get herself away from her sister and try to forge her own life, the downside of that was that she was now seeing an even less real version of Summer's life. I mean, we already, even without social media, we don't see people's inner lives, do we? We stand outside their houses, and of course, if they invite us in, they've already vacuumed and tidied everything up. So, but I think social media creates another layer of unreality between what we see and what's really going on.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll see people, you'll know them with their parents, and then you see the children by themselves, and they're different people because they're not who they think that their parents think they have to be. And they'll say different things and they'll act different ways because it's even their role within the family. They're not playing that role. They're just being themselves. If that sounds like, you know, crazy or not. But I think that people play different roles in different places of where they are. These twins were playing different roles when they were growing up because they were united when their father started a new family. And then when they're on their own, they're rivals again. But really, if it's up against the father again and the other family, who are they? Are they together? It's that push-pull kind of a thing that you see going back and forth. And it's often people have so many different complex personalities. It's not just the one that you see at one time.
Yeah, and then of course there's the younger brother who's nearly forgotten about because these twins, and I've talked to mothers of twins who say twins really take over the family, particularly when they're the firstborn. You know, they attract so much attention. They're celebrities from the first day that you walk out of the house with that double stroller and can't get anywhere without passers-by stopping to admire the twins. And so I really liked the idea of having a younger brother who brings his own perspective to the story, but is nearly forgotten about by the twins because they're so wrapped up in each other and the sort of celebrity status that they enjoy.
And they don't understand what he sees about the two of them. It's them, it's their world, and he's like a minor character in it to a lot of times. Like that's the way they're seeing. And they don't really see his perspective on anything. They're just seeing, well, we know what's going on right in the world, and he's somewhere orbiting around us. You're right. It's like orbiting around their world.
Yeah, so one of my early readers, actually, when I was writing the novel, was the younger sibling of identical twins. And he was talking about Ben all the way through. He obviously identified with Ben and said, yeah, you know everything about your older siblings. They don't know much about you because you're younger and less interesting and easily forgotten. And I really enjoyed putting that perspective into the story.
Yeah, it's like, okay, like this is what's going on, and here's the world, and here's everybody else. And when he comes in later on, he plays a very big role, but I'm not giving anything away. So the title was always The Girl in the Mirror. The title, you knew that right from the start, correct? And did you get any pushback from any of the publishers when the book was sold?
No, they loved it. And I always thought that they would want to change it, because I thought that there would be, there are so many books with girl in the title and the genre. But I felt that New Zealand and Australia had not had our girl title. So there's really been a really big one in the States with Gone Girl. There's been Girl on the Train in the UK. There are the Swedish Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series. And I quite like that there's two girls in this, because it's kind of like one for New Zealand and one for Australia. Yeah, I did. I actually heard someone comment on the radio just before the book came out. One of our personalities who's also on TV commented, oh, yet another girl thriller. She wouldn't have dared use any other title. And then on pub day, I was on his TV show. And so I said to him, I heard you make that comment on the radio, And the next week he said, I shouldn't have ever made that comment. And now I've started reading the book. And so he was a convert to the book and to the title. Yeah.
And it's funny because I've, thought I've been in that girl trap for, the last years with thrillers. I didn't really think about it with this one because, first of all, there were two right from the beginning. The story was so different. And because they were the mirror twins, I just saw the mirror being the bigger word than girl, believe it or not. It's like, that was my takeaway, was the mirror, the way the mirror played into the story, just the mirror twins, just everything that was happening. It never even, and usually I'd be the type of person would say, oh gosh, another girl book. Somehow it didn't even faze me this time. Interesting.
Yeah, I have been told that publishers always want to change the title of your novel. So I just sent it off naively thinking, oh, well, they'll choose the title that they want. And then the Australian publishers said that they loved it, Allen and Unwin. And then when William Morrow bought the American rights, they loved it too. So I was relieved, because I would have found it hard to part with that title when it is really woven into the story. It's a really important part of the story.
Yeah, it totally works. Well, I absolutely love the cover, because I think the colors work. I think and this is the American cover. So now if you could show everybody, you've got the Australia, New Zealand cover there. You have that, which is like completely different. So if we saw this, the girl in the mirror, so we've got the black and the goldish yellow. So we've got that working. And then you have the UK cover, which
I'll try to show it to you on my phone, because I don't have a physical copy yet. But yeah.
And it sort of blends both of them. It's got the colors from both. And it's so interesting to see the way the way it's interpreted in three different places, how the story comes together.
Yeah, so this is going to be a summer read in the UK. So I guess they've gone for that poolside look, but also it looks a little bit more sinister at the top where the water turns black. So I quite like that.
And now, what is it out in the UK? Are we out next summer?
It's coming out in March and April in the UK. Yeah.
Is it fun to try to keep all the pub dates straight? I mean, to sit there and say, okay, wait a second, this is the book that everybody's talking about, and it's already been out since last August, but I'm going to go do more talking about it, and it'll be March or April. So it's, keeping it all straight. Yeah,
it's really confusing. I mean, it's actually, there's 6 translations happening, and I just have no idea when they're happening, but I'm so excited for 6 more covers, right? I mean, I think they often just use the same artwork with just the words changed, but some of them do original covers as well. So sometimes they can be radically different. They can be radically different looking, because I know that many authors are posting them up on social media, and you're looking and go, wow, that is completely different interpretation. But they clearly know their audience or the time of year that the book is coming out.
and they play along with it from that point of view. But it's fun. It's fun to see all the different, like, this is why they did this. So you were a lawyer, like you did study law. What kind of a lawyer were you? What was your area of interest?
So I started practicing law at 21, and I went into a big law firm practicing corporate law. And then I became a barrister, which I don't know if you have that in America. I don't mean someone who makes coffee. So that's like a court lawyer. And then I had my children in my late 20s. So my legal career was sort of fit in quite early in my life. And I stayed at home with the kids for a long time, particularly because my daughter was born extremely early. And so she needed to, she was immunocompromised, which is something we all understand in 2020. So she needed to stay home. And then we got into sailing around the world. So I had a good sort of 10 years out of the workforce and came back and started teaching law, teaching the bar exam, essentially. And I've now given that up, which was quite difficult to do, but I'm really focusing full time on writing from now on.
Well, I could see why, because you're very, very good at it. Have I also heard that the book has been optioned for a film? Can you say anything about that, or is it till top secret?
Yeah, I'm allowed to say that the book has been optioned for film, and it's Hollywood based, but I'm not allowed to say any more than that at the moment. I'm hoping that there will be an announcement very soon. Yeah.
Well, I think that also the fact that the book, that everything could be shot on water would be a really good thing right now, because then you have to worry about people being too close to each other. Well, it's like, okay, just take that ship, go out on the water. We'll be shooting lots of out there. Everybody will be quarantined on the ship. There you go.
Yeah, they have said that, and they've said often just one actress on the ship. And I don't know whether they use a body double in order to, capture the identical twin. But if they're using CGI, then they only need one actress on the ship at a time, and that's quite good for COVID. Yeah.
Yeah. It's let's see, there were two different shows recently, and I'm gonna have to remember which ones they are. There were two things that were on HBO, and both of them, like I think it was The Deuce. Somebody plays both parts. One actor plays both parts. It was,
Right.
Yeah. And then there was I'm spacing.
Mark Ruffalo.
Yes, Mark Ruffalo. Right.
Yeah.
So it has been done with one actor playing both parts. So yeah, there's a possibility of doing this. I think it'll be an absolutely brilliant film. And I think that what it'll do is it's got that travel kind of appeal besides having the rivalry between the sisters. And then it also has the fortune and what people are trying to do. I mean, it's so multi-layered of what's going on that no matter which story you're interested in, it's going to be captivating you for a completely different reason and drawing you in.
Yeah, and I think it would be really fun to tease some of that out. And, when I wrote the book, I was very much aware that as a debut novelist in New Zealand and Australia, length is actually important. You can't try to get a really, really long book published. But I think there are some scenes in the book that, you could tease them out and maybe even write some additional scenes. So that would be fun.
Yeah, even when they're just in Thailand and they're walking around, that could be a whole long sequence. It could be a much longer sequence of them eating or whatever they're doing to get you really into the flavor of the place even more. So there are all those moments that they could Hollywoodize in like 3 moments.
Yeah, and I think they'd really enjoy just, the clothing choices that would make the same actress look so different, and, her mannerisms as well. I think that would be a really fascinating and exciting role for a young actress to play these two characters with the same appearance, but just really, really different personalities shining through.
Yeah. And what's fun is because the book shifts, and I'm not going to give anything away, but trust me, a couple of times you just completely shift on what you're seeing and what's happening, and you're surprised. And did you know in the beginning what you were going to do, or did those surprises come upon you as well? Like, did you know any of these reveals?
I absolutely knew where the book was ending. I didn't know whether I would be able to write it. I mean, how difficult, you can probably see how technically difficult it was to write the ending. And so I kept thinking, I hope I don't fall flat at that point and get stuck with writing those crucial final chapters. But I forced myself to forget about it, because I knew that although there have to be some clues planted so that the reader doesn't feel completely blindsided by the twist. I needed the book to work before the twists happen, and I mean, there's more than one twist, but in each case, I needed to almost forget what was really coming so that the reader would not be tipped off too easily.
Yeah, and did a very good job of that, because it was like boom, boom, boom. And I did reread large sections and say, wait, how did I miss that completely? But I didn't feel like I've been run roughshod or anything like that. Sometimes that happens and you're just there like, I just thought I wasn't clever. I thought I should have been a lot more clever, but I remembered also I couldn't have also steered the boat. There are a lot of things I couldn't have done. So I didn't feel like, I wasn't that unclever.
Yeah, I have talked to people who've read it twice, and they say, the second time you read it, just about every sentence has a very different meaning from what you take the first time that you read it. So, I used to feel frustrated that, nobody's going to read this book twice, because that's really what I wanted readers to do. And of course, most people do just read a book once because there are so many books out there that we want to read. But it has been really satisfying when someone's told me that they've gone back and reread.
Believe me, my shelf is very, very high, but I would like to go back and reread, because I see exactly how they feel, because there's, I think it's a really good study. And I think that, somewhere along the way, thriller writers teach courses to other thriller writers. I think that there's a lot to learn from someone studying this book. And if somebody who wants to be a thriller writer, and I know that must be extremely heady for you to hear as a debut novelist, but there's so much in there of, if you just sit there and watch how this is constructed, it's a really interesting premise build-up, character development, plot development, but then there's this whole other thing that's happening underneath. And for all four things to work together well is the reason this book works so well. You've got great character, you've got a great premise of what's going to happen, you've got great plotting, but then it's also just the way the whole thing hangs just works really well. As it's aspirational in a lot of ways, and then it's real life in others, of the tension that happens. In case anybody can't tell, I'm a complete fan, in case you
Well, thank you. It was actually really, really hard to write, to make all of those things work at once. It does require you to just go over and over the writing just to get it exactly right, because you can't cheat. You can't say something that is actually going to turn out to be inconsistent with truth as revealed at the end. Yeah.
Well, do you know what I felt too, though, as I was reading, is I also, did you actually write the plot out of what was going to happen and then have things happen? And then what role did an editor take in this whole process? Because you had an editor in Australia, and then did the editor in New York do something different with the book as well?
Yeah, it kind of got double edited, which is appropriate for a book about twins, isn't it? Because I was really lucky that the book sold so early to William Morrow. So I had done the developmental edit with the Australian team, but I had not done the copy edit. So I was horrified when I didn't realize that it had gone to America, and I was going, wow, so big New York editors are reading my book and it hasn't been copy edited. I hope there's no spelling mistakes. But because it happened so early in the process, I was then able to have editorial input from Liz Stein at William Morrow, which was just fantastic to get a second round of editing. And then the copy editing happened twice as well, because that's the point where you've got American spelling for your American readers. And there's a few words in the Australasian edition that I think would have baffled American readers, so they were changed to more standard English.
Interesting. It's all those things that, you think about, the readers think about the plot and they think about the story, but the editing process, I think, is something that's so interesting, because it can take a story in a different direction. There's an author we interviewed a couple of months ago, and he said the ending wasn't the ending. And one day his editor sat her down and said, this should be the ending. And he had to rewrite to get to that ending of what was going on. And I think that what an editor can contribute to a story by a turn of phrase, a turn of just something that could tighten up the story, I think is something that it's sort of something we expect from really good books, but it's something that we really don't think about that much.
Yeah, I think the author almost gets to the end of her tether in a way that the author can no longer see the wood for the trees. The author is sort of mired in the book, and the editor comes along and is a pair of fresh eyes, and that's really, really valuable. I've definitely heard of a lot of debut authors finding it difficult to be edited because they feel as though the book is perfect. But I never felt that way. I always felt that I really relished getting, collaboration from editors.
Yeah. And well, you can tell though, because it's very, very polished. And at the same time, it's like, whoa, this has really totally blown me away. Fabulous, great debut novel. Now, with that in mind, are you working on something else?
Yeah, so my second novel is actually with my editors at Allen and Unwin at the moment.
Wow.
So yeah, fingers crossed for that. And of course, I'm aware that I should be starting work on my third. I've got a beautiful idea that I'm really excited about and really want to start working on. But it's, in a way, I've been a victim of the book's success, that I didn't expect that I would be going on tour here in New Zealand. It's not that common, especially for debut novelists, to go on tour, and then it became obvious that that was something that should happen. And so I've just come back from tour, and now, of course, the American launch is only a week away. So I'm spending quite a lot of time on that side of writing, which I have to say I'm really enjoying, but it means that the third novel is getting pushed back a little.
The good news is you have the idea for the third novel, because a lot of times we're talking to people and they say, I have no idea what I'm going to do next. Having the idea is really like a big start at this point. And even in all the conversations that you're having with people, you see what people take away from the books. So this kind of publicity tour, seeing what people relate to in Australia, New Zealand, seeing what they were coming to come away with as you talk to different people in the States, I think it's going to be so interesting for you for the rest of the writing process to see what you put a lot of emphasis on, and then do people really notice it, or what do they really have as their big takeaways?
Yeah, it's just really interesting, the different things that people take away from the novel. And I mean, I am just still blown away by the fact that people will hear that I'm going to a bookstore, and they will get in their car and drive to that bookstore with their copy that they've already bought, to bring it back just to meet me and tell me what they thought of the book and get my signature. That's just so exciting for an author, and you don't really believe that it's going to happen until it happens. So, but they take all sorts of different things away from the book. And at one stage on my tour, everyone in the room was a twin except for me. Everyone standing around the signing table was a twin, and I felt like, oh, I'm the least qualified to write this book. But that was really interesting, to meet twins and to hear what they thought. And they would say, oh, I've bought one copy for me and one for my twin sister.
It's just really, and what I'm loving is we might not have met. We might have not been able to do this if it wasn't for Zoom and COVID happening at this point, because you might have come to New York. It might not have been a day that I was available, or you were available, or this was going on, or that was going on, but you're getting the opportunity to talk to so many people at this point. I know you've got an event tonight with Poison Pen, the bookstore out in Scottsdale. You've got all these interesting things going on, and different perspectives that everybody are going to be able to bring to your work that you may not have heard quite the same way. I know that I got out of the pool that afternoon, took a picture of the book, tagged you on Instagram, and said, I want to talk to this person. And it was so funny because immediately I was on the phone with your publicist to figure out how to make that happen. And, a while back, it might not have happened quite that same way. We might have been typing questions to each other. It would have been a lot more boring.
Yeah, and it is quite an eco-friendly way to do it, isn't it? I mean, I know a lot of people are really sick of Zoom, but it's probably less tiring and more convenient in a lot of ways to be Zooming rather than trying to sort of jet set around all the different countries where media are getting in touch with me.
Yeah, and I also love that you're in the opposite hemisphere. I've always said that, I always love summer and spring and summer more than any other place, any other seasons. And I've often said that, some people say they're going to retire to Florida or someplace warm. I said, no, I'm going to another hemisphere. I'll just be switching hemispheres each year. It'd be so much easier to be doing that. So you definitely give us a perspective on that as well.
Yeah, well, it's springtime here at the moment, so as well as being morning. So everything is always the opposite here.
Well, it was fun because when I was trying to figure out what time to interview you, I was like, wait a second, if we do this, it won't be too early in the morning for her. We can figure out how to do this. But I remember I was thinking of that because I was like, wait a second, I'm going to try and get her at like 2:00 in the morning. What do I have to do to make this normal? So.
Oh yeah, I still get confused. I've actually done another interview already this morning, so it was fine. But yeah, it is. I think the confusing thing is that it's Wednesday here right now, and I think it's Tuesday for you, or I might have that wrong, but yeah.
You have it right. You have it correct. Yeah.
I check on my date and time converter all the time because it's really difficult. And of course, when you switch between daylight saving time and regular time, you don't do that at the same time as us, so the time difference changes over and over again. Yeah.
Significantly. Well, I'm hoping that some way you do get to the States and we do get to meet in person. This, in the meantime, has been absolutely wonderful. And I look forward to seeing the next book and the next one. I mean, I'm putting you up for 2. So it's just, it's really nice when you've read somebody, because after all, you've written The Girl in the Mirror, you can do 2 more books. No problem.
Yeah, I certainly feel as though I have a few more books in me and I just really want to get them out into the world. So I'm definitely keeping writing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure.
Oh, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk with you. Thank you.
And to our readers, we look forward to seeing you next time on Book Reporter Talks To.